Hello and welcome to this building in public video. So this is the first of this kind of video that I want to put out there, and what it is me showing you how software is built in public via a open source application for a pet rescue that I started and has been picked up by Ruby for Good. So the repository is public. There's lots of contributors, almost 50 contributors. Anyone can come along and contribute to this kind of project. And I've talked about open source in the past and how it's a very useful way to really get the closest thing you can to real world development workflows in a company where you would be paid as a software developer. So I think this kind of stuff is going to be useful to just put out there for anyone who's interested. What does this work even look like? And I'll also talk a little bit about how you can get involved in open source, how you can go about picking up issues, how to think about things, and it might be a little slow here and there because I'm just going to be coding live. So it's up to you. You can watch if you're interested in this kind of stuff. But I will try and keep it interesting and see how we do. So let's switch screens here. Now what you're going to want to do is find an open source project that you are interested in. And in this case, we're looking at the Baja Pet Rescue project, which is a Ruby for Good project. And what it's doing is building a platform for small pet adoption agencies out there in order to help them manage their operations. They can upload pets and manage applications for fostering and adoption on these pets. So as you may be aware, a lot of these organizations just don't have the time or the energy to manage a website, let alone an application that actually provides useful functionality. So this is the repo here. First thing you want to do whenever you land on an open source project is just go down, get a sense of what the project is about, and read the README. And I lied because this is actually my old repo. So I'm just going to go to the actual repo, which is here in Ruby for Good, Pet Rescue. So this is the repo for the current project where we have 43 contributors so far, and it's built in Ruby on Rails. First thing you want to do is go to the README and just understand what is this project for, and then if you're interested in that, you can keep going, and the next thing you want to do is get this project application running locally on your machine, because you want to be able to run this locally, go into your browser, play around with it, learn the application, pretend that you're a user and go through different user flows, and usually they'll have credentials for certain users in the README, which we have, for example, right here. You can go through the user flows for staff or an adopter, for example. And all the instructions are going to be here, along with contribution guidelines about how to contribute, picking up issues, how to make pull requests. And then there's going to be information about the installation and the setup of the application to get it running. And then usually running tests as well is another important thing when you're making contributions. And yeah, I mean, that's about it. There's some other stuff about core values and some additional information, and then some pictures of about half of the contributors here. So for example, you'd go to the issues tab and you'd take a look in the issues and you'd be like, okay, do any of these stand out to me? And usually the good first issue tag is going to be on an issue that is a good first issue. So this is a great place to start to make your first contribution. And what I'd recommend is that you get an application up and running locally, you learn about it a little bit, you play around with it, you get to understand it, then you pick up something that's a good first issue. And as an aside to that, there might be a Slack channel, for example, where you can come in and ask questions about the project. So here's an example here in this Slack channel where you can come in and you can ask questions about the different projects and get responses. And it's a great way to learn about issues, even ask for issues, because sometimes there's lots of issues in a backlog. You can go in there and say, hey, I'm new. I want a good first issue, and someone will create the issue for you. That's what happened to me on one of these other projects for Ruby for Good. Just a great way to kind of make a connection with someone on the project and get your first issue. So in this particular video, we're going to be looking at scoping models to organizations. So this is an issue that we discovered yesterday, where we're using Act as Tenant Gem which is a gem that allows multi-tenancy within an application. And all multi-tenancy is really doing is it's just scoping all of the resources to a tenant. So as you can think about this more practically, this application is going to allow multiple pet rescue organizations to sign up under one application. So each pet rescue organization is its own tenant. And what multi-tenancy does is it just scopes all of their data under their organization ID. So it's a way to keep data scoped to an organization, and it helps to manage that so that there's no bleeding of data across into other organizations. In the sense of Access Tenant, it's a single database. So it's row level scoping. So each record that you want scoped to an organization has to have an organization ID column on the attribute, or attribute column to match an attribute on the model, and that's the way you scope it. There is also the apartment gem, which is fairly common in Ruby on Rails as well, and that does allow database scoping, and that's what I use at work, where each tenant actually has their own database. And the programming, the way you approach your programming is going to be slightly different between the two. It's easier, I think, to use apartment gem because you scope to a database and you just play around with the data in that database. It's easier to keep the data separate. There's very low risk of data bleeding. In Access Tenant, I think there's a little more configuration set up and care and attention to make sure that those bleeds don't exist, but it still works very well in a single database, and that's all we need for our MVP. So in this case, we have multiple models that are not scoped to an organization ID, and I had encountered a problem in our seed files where we were calling, for example, adopter foster account.all, and it was returning all of the adopter foster accounts from every organization. And then we were creating records based on those, and it was causing an error when we were trying to, Access Tenant was trying to scope things under the organization. So what we have to do is come in here and add organization ID to each of these tables, corresponding tables, and then also add the association to the organization using the Access Tenant gem on each model. And then that way, every one of these records that corresponds to one of these models will be mapped or scoped to an organization, so that when we're in the organization scope, we will say adopter foster account.all, and it will only return those accounts that are scoped to that organization. So whenever you come into an issue, there's usually going to be a bit of description and some acceptance criteria. I am not the best issue writer or ticket writer, admittedly, but I do try and provide details that are going to help developers. So in this case, we have a number of models that are not scoped to the tenant, which is the organization. So within the tenant context, if you call model.all, you will get all records for all organizations. This is not desirable, and we should leverage the Access Tenant gem to scope these resources accordingly. So the resources that need scoping are these 5 models and tables here. And then the acceptance criteria, these are just the things that you need to achieve in order for this issue to be acceptable. So we need to create a migration to add organization ID to each corresponding model table. And then each model should also have an association or belong to org using Access Tenant, and run the test suite just to make sure nothing is broken. Okay, so what I like to do is always start from main branch. So you may be working off of a fork of the repository, and so you have your own main branch there, and you have to set your upstream, and regularly you'll want to pull from the upstream, which is the actual project repository that you've forked from, and you'll want to sync those with your fork main branch. And then whenever you're doing work, you want to be on a feature branch off of your main branch. So you'll also want to merge that code from your main branch into your feature branch. Yes, Git can be complicated when you're getting your head around it at first, but once you start using it, it will make sense eventually. And I think there are certain commands that you will learn to use in Git that will make your life much easier. So what I'm going to do is go ahead here and make a new branch. And what I would like to do is actually get the ticket number. So it's 605. Oops, Git checkout. We'll call it 605. What do we call this? Let's say scope resources to org, something like that. So now we're on our new branch. One thing I didn't do, just for demonstration, is to pull the latest changes from main branch. So you always want to do that just to make sure that you're up to date. Here I was already up to date, so no problem. So I'm going to go and check out my feature branch. Okay, and now we're on this branch. And so we can start making code changes. But I actually did something earlier and I used git stash. So I'm going to apply those changes. What git stash does is if you're on a branch and you make changes, but you actually want to switch branches, Git won't allow you to switch branches if you have changes that haven't been committed. So git stash is a way to just pluck those changes out of that branch so that you can switch branches. And it will also allow you to then later apply those changes back on any branch that you choose. So that's exactly what I did here. I plucked them off of another branch and then I now applied them to my new branch. So git stash and git stash apply is very useful. And one thing to note, if you have any new files, you want to use git stash -- untracked, include untracked, I believe it is, going off of memory. You can look it up if I'm wrong. In fact, let's just do that. Yeah, that's right, include untracked. So that's a very useful way to make sure that you're stashing all of your changes. Okay, don't need that command. Now we can look at code. There's the IDs on my other screen here. Okay, so one thing I like to do, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to think before we code, right? What do we need to do? We're going to go and then we're going to take a look at this ticket. So we need to create a migration to add the organization ID to each corresponding model table. And we've got to think about, okay, do we need an index on that? And do we need a foreign key on there in the context of Rails? I think an index, yes, but foreign key, perhaps not necessary, because these will be scoped to other models where there is a foreign key, I believe. We can think about that in a second. So that's the first thing, is adding a migration to each of these corresponding tables. Then we want to update the model to create a belongs to association with the organization, but we are using a gem called access tenant. So we're going to use that gems method to create that association. And there's examples of how we've already done that in the app. And this is one thing that I would highly suggest when you are working in a new application, especially if it's an existing application with a lot of code in already and it's not net new. Go in and look at that other code as inspiration or a guide on how you should write your code, right? Because that keeps things consistent within the application in terms of how code is written. And secondly, it just saves you time because it's already been done in the past. So go and look for something similar and be like, yes, this is what I need. I'm going to reuse it. Or yes, this is almost what I need. I'm going to take it and change it a little bit. And then I have what I need. So here I'd found an example of where we're adding the organization ID to another model called matches. So this is the migration essentially that I need to run. Simple. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy this. It is what I need. So it's adding a reference to matches table on the organization, and we're not allowing any nulls. So there has to be a value in there. And if you want to look at what add references, so we're just creating associations using references. The Rails guide is always going to be your friend. So what does it do? The generator accepts column types as references, blah, 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 for example. So this is just the generator, generates the following add reference. So this migration will create, so we're adding reference on products, referring to user. And this one, they're setting foreign key true. I don't think we need to be doing that in this case. But this will create a user ID column on the products table. Okay, so that's just saying that a product is now belonging to a user in this case. And that's what we need. Always good to double check the code that you are copying to make sure it is what you need. And in Rails migrations, this is a domain specific language. It is, in other words, in simple terms, this is a language written specifically for migrations. So you have to either know it or you don't. And it's always good just to double check what you're doing. And in Rails, we can create migrations using a generator. So I'll say Rails G migration. We're adding multiple tables. You can do it quickly, like here. You could generate migration and pass this argument here, user colon references. I'm not going to do that just because I like to, and what that will do is it will actually create this migration for you, pre-filled. I'm not going to do that. I like to fill out my migrations by hand. I don't know, call me old school or not smart, but that's just how I like to do it. Because I don't do migrations all that often, so I often forget what stuff is doing. So let's say we're going to add organization ID to tables. I think we'll just keep it very generic. That's all we're doing. That describes what we're doing. So that's going to generate the migration file for us, which is just popped up here. We've already got def change, but I copied def change, so I'm just going to overwrite that. No, I didn't. I lied. So we're going to put that in here. Obviously, we don't want to be doing this to the matches table because we have already done this on the matches table. What we're now going to do is make sure that we add it to each of these tables that is defined in the issue. And it's always a good idea just to make sure you are naming those tables correctly. So let's start adopter application. I just like to look at the schema because this is not going to lie. So adopter applications table, that's exactly what we want. So we come back to our migration, close that one. So we add a reference to adopter applications to organization. Great. Let's do that again, and this time we're doing it for adopter foster accounts table. And just to verify that that is the name of the table, adopter foster accounts, good. Now we need adopter foster profiles, which is right here. Yeah, adopter foster profiles. There we go. And got no typos in there. Donations table, which is right here, donations, and the last one was tasks, so that'll be the tasks table. Yes, okay, so donations and tasks. Donations and tasks. Okay, so this is our migration, and it's going to add references to all these tables: adopter applications, adopter foster accounts, adopter foster profiles, donations, tasks. That should be all we need to do to add those columns to the table. So we can run migrate, and we have an error. So what do you say? Oh, right, not null. Because there are existing values in this table that have, so this table, we're adding a brand new column with a not null constraint, and we already have data in this database table. Now, if this was in production, you'd have to have a way to go and backfill all of those records. But I'm not in production, I'm in development. So I can be very, let's say, I'm gonna call it lazy, but we can take this route. We can actually drop the database, and then we can recreate it, and then we can run those migrations again, and because there's no existing data, those migrations will run, and there's not going to be any violations because there's not going to be any columns with null false, or with any null values rather, sorry. Okay, so those migrations have run, and we can actually come in, check the schema. For example, we did tasks. So we should have an organization ID here, and we have an index, an organization ID. Great, that's exactly what we wanted. The index, all that's going to do is just speed up any queries where we're pulling out tasks using a particular organization ID. There are also performance considerations to make with indexing. I think it depends on how frequently you're going to be calling a particular resource, in this case scoped under organization, versus if you're not calling it frequently, then indexing is not going to be efficient. But if you are calling it frequently, then putting an index on there would probably outweigh those inefficiencies by making the data collection much quicker. What do we got here? Donations, I mean, I'm going to trust that this all ran properly, but if you wanted to, you could come in and check. Yeah, we got donations, Dr. Foster profiles. What was the other one? Dr. Foster profiles, Dr. Foster accounts, and Dr. applications. So yeah, we got it here, and Dr. applications. I ran by it. Dr. applications. Oh, right here. Yeah, already said it. Okay. Yes, coding in public. For some reason, I think I lose IQ points when I know someone's watching. Maybe other people have experienced that too. I think it just takes practice, and this is why I like doing this, because it is good practice for doing this. Because someone might actually watch this. Okay. Now the migration is done. Pretty simple. We have the table up and running. Consideration here. I'm thinking that a consequence of doing this is that any time that we are creating any one of these records in the application, we're now going to have to pass in an organization ID. It's not going to be done automatically. So we'll probably get a lot of failures in the test suite for that reason, and we may have to go and fix those. But let's first focus on the models and add what we need to on those. So adopt application. And just as an example of what we need to scope using this method from access tenant. And this will create a belongs to relationship that is more unique and allows the access tenant gem to do its thing behind the scenes to help with the scoping. So adopt application. We're going to just come and add that straight here. Adopt Foster account. And sorry, I have a bit of a cold again, so a bit nasally. Adopt a Foster profile. Donation and task. Okay, so these are now all scoped to the organization. And we have a script in the bin folder of this repository right here. And it's a setup file. And what this will do is install gems, and then it will run the setup and migration of any pending migrations, and run the seed file as well. And if you have an instance of the Rails server running, it will restart that as well. Anyway, this just helps developers save a little bit of time. So run that. I expect that things will fail. Yes. Okay, so what do we got here? So we actually have a syntax error in the alter seed file. So if we come down to db seeds, alter.rb, oh, okay. We have a merge conflict by the look of it. What's this doing here? Now, if I've got to resolve these. I didn't see that come through. So this is RubyMine that I'm using, it is actually quite nice. It's purposefully built for Ruby on Rails. So it will do things that IDEs like VS or Visual Studio Code will not do. I mean, that's not a bad idea. I've used that too and it's been fine. But merging or resolving merge conflicts is generally nice and simple in here. So we've got the changes from the server. And then we have my version. And then we have the result in the middle. So what did I change here? .foster account all.sample. It's the same as what is from the from main. Yeah, pet all.sample. Oh, I see. It just hasn't brought in those changes from my stash changes. That's what it was. And then this is new that I added. This is from my stash changes, actually, not from the server. Okay, so this is just some code that I added to prevent duplicate adapter applications. And it's going to be the exact same changes on this other file because the seed is exactly the same. So we'll bring in both of these. And they're good. And you can see here the issue was that we were calling adapter first account.all while we were setting up the seed file. But it was using adapter foster accounts from another organization, which is running from the seed file that runs before this, and it was causing issues for this organization. Anyway, that's that done. Let's try seeding the database again. Okay, looks like it all went well. Now I was thinking that we'd have organization ID issues, but and this is me not knowing exactly how the access tenant gem is working all the time. But let's just take a look at these pets, for example. When we create this pet, we are not having to define an organization ID. So it stands to reason then we don't have to define an organization ID on these other resources. Yeah, none of these resources have an organization ID, and that's okay, because we are all scoped under the organization. So we're passing all of this code in a block to access tenant with tenant setting the organization here. So that will handle setting the organization on all of these resources. So that has me thinking then that we may not actually have any issues in our application code whenever we're creating a resource, because we should be creating that resource under the scope of an organization, because we're generally setting an organization scope in the context of the application. I think, where do we do this? It's in the application controller level. So whenever a request comes in, it's not in the, we don't set scope in the roots. But what we do have, we have application control. Now this inherits from action controller base. Okay. What do? We set current user. There's an organizations controller, I think it was. I'm just trying to figure out and remember where we set well, I don't want to obsess over this and make this last forever, but this is welcome to development. You can probably see it on your screen. You're just saying it's right there, it's right there. Organizations, it's not in here. Is it the base controller? Organization scopable. I think this is where we do it. So it's in the base controller for the organization. This is where we set the tenant. This inherits from applications controller. So okay, that's what it is. All of these controllers here inherit from the organization's base controller. So all of these organization scoped controllers inherit from here. So every action within here is operating under the access tenant scope. So similar to here, all of the code that we're executing in these controllers will be under that scope. And I believe the same would apply on the model because of the association. Still learning about access tenant, and usually I learn by making mistakes. Let's run. No, that's the wrong command. It's Rails test all. So we'll just run the test locally, see if anything breaks. The test suite in this app is not, it's still in development. The coverage, I couldn't tell you what percent we're at, but it's certainly nowhere near 100, probably more like 50. Yeah, but this will give us an idea of what's broken. And you can see we have a ton of tests broken here. But in general, these are all system tests that are breaking. Okay, these are all system tests. This, so the error is that it reached server, but there's still pending connections. So this might actually be a timeout issue. I don't think that there's anything broken, at least within the integration tests and the unit tests that we have for models and controllers. Nothing seems to be broken. Oh, here we have one test that breaks on a donation. And that's because they were not originally scoped to an organization. So we get an error here. Test, so post request to complete status creates a new donation. All right, so it's just not creating the donation. And in this case, we might need to be passing in an organization ID. But I don't know if you really care about me fixing these. Let's just take a quick look at this test. So usually when you get a broken test, you'll want to see where that test is. So it's in test integration donation flow test, and line 32 is the issue. So we're test integration donation flow test, and we're on line 32 right here. Now, I do not remember enough about this when I wrote it as to how this is working exactly. So donation count before, post donations, complete a PayPal response. So why is this not creating a donation? Because we're asserting that there should be one more donation record added to the donations table here. But that is not the case. So what we could do, let's take a look. This is foreign donations controller, but I don't know. See, this is not scoped under organization. And if you recall, I was saying that the base controller in here is what sets the tenant. So my expectation here is that because this code is executed outside the context of this base controller, which sets the tenant, it's not getting a organization ID assigned to the record, and therefore it's failing the constraint, the validation. So there's a database constraint that field cannot be null. And I think that either that or there may be validation too through the access tenant organization. I'm not sure if that adds a validation, probably doesn't, so I think it might be the database that's causing this. Either way, that seems to be the issue. So what we could do, let's see, because we could add the donations should really be scoped under the organization. So let's just come to this donations control. So what do we got here? It's just initializes an amount, currency, and a status. Where do we actually create the donation? Right here. This is just a mapper. Right, so this is where we create the donation right here. For example, let's just say organization ID is equal to, let's just go organization dot first.id. Okay, and RubyMine, for some reason, whenever you are defining a new instance, it does not like it when you pass arguments like this, or attributes as symbols like this. I'm not sure why, I haven't bothered looking into it. Just thinking here, so this is creating a new donation off of a mapped response, which is based off of this. This should work. This should work. And now let's just come and run that test individually. So Rails test, integration, donation, flow test. We'll just run the whole thing. Railed. Does not like me calling railed. Oops. Okay. Clearly being silly. There we go. So I'm going to run that test file again. Ah, okay. It does not want me to do it like this. It's because we're passing in a mapped. I think we're passing in an array here of these mapped responses. Oops. Let's go to the PayPal response. Just go into here. So it's pulling in this. What we'll do is add it here instead. And we'll see how that behaves. All right, so they pass now. So that was the problem, was that we didn't have an organization ID on the donation. So I think I'm going to move the donations controller and scope it under organizations. Then I should be able to get rid of this. Though the root will change and I'll have to change the roots as well. But I'm not going to do that on this video. But essentially I think what I have to do is, if we look in the roots, we have this module of organizations. Currently donations is outside of that module or this scope, so I just have to move it down into here. And then I would update the test, which is here, and I'd have to change this to, there would be like, I guess it would be scoped to an organization like Baja/donations, and then it should do what it's supposed to do and add that ID. That is the long and the short of what I would do here to fulfill that issue. Now this isn't completely fulfilled because I haven't made this test pass in the way I want it to just yet, but that's okay. One thing you always want to be doing is checking git status. You want to be making sure that you don't have anything in here that is changed that shouldn't be changed. So I often like to come in and check my files so I can see the diffs, and I can see, okay, yeah, I want that code on this file, and here's the second seed file, I want that. Okay, so this is just an annotation gem that annotates on each model what the table looks like. So here we're looking at, which one is this? Adopter application model. We now have an organization ID with an index and this access tenant association. Yes, that's good. And I'll go through each of these to make sure that they're all good. And then a big one to check is that the schema is always the way you expect it to. So again, we got the ID and the index added to these tables. And that's that. And then obviously if there's any unversion files, which in this case will be the migration, I check that as well to make sure that I'm happy with it. Once I'm happy with things, I will git add and git commit. And then I will, once I'm happy with everything, I will push that up to, in this case, if you're on a fork, you push it up to your remote on that fork, and then you make a pull request from there. And one last thing I would show you when you're making a pull request, I'll just give you an example pull request here. You always want to make sure that you fill out the description that explains what it is you've done, the approach that you took and why you took that approach. And then if there's any areas in the code that you think warrant a little additional explanation, then you should go in, like Ken has done here, and make comments on those areas in the code. That helps the reviewer a lot to understand your thinking, why you approach something a certain way. Maybe I would think, oh, you should go this way, but actually you went that way, and you'd explain why, and it's like, oh, okay. It helps the conversation. If you make UI changes, then always include a screenshot in your pull request. Okay, that's it there. It's getting a long video, but that's kind of demonstrates a bit of a workflow working on an issue in Ruby on Rails in the open source pet rescue project for Ruby for Good. If you have any questions, comments, let me know. If you're still watching, I'd be very surprised. And hello if you are. We'll see you on the next one. Bye-bye.